This is Floss Weekly, episode 778, recorded Wednesday, April 10th. OctoPrint. People are amazing at breaking stuff. Hey, this week Katherine Druckman joins me, and we talk with Gina Häußge all about OctoPrint. That's the open source software that you can put on a Raspberry Pi, or any computer really, to babysit a 3D printer, except it's got more tricks up its sleeve than that. It will slice, it will control, all kinds of stuff. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. Hey everybody, it is time for Floss Weekly. That's the show about free, Libre, and open source software, and sometimes we throw some hardware in, and today is going to be, I think, the intersection between software and hardware, and maybe talking about one of those magical things that takes software and turns it into hardware. But before we get to that, let's bring Katherine on. Hey Katherine, welcome back.
Hey.
As one of our favorite co-hosts. It's good to have you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, it seems, I've
it's
pulled
been
in.
A minute.
It has been. I've pulled in some other co-hosts when people haven't been available, and so it seems like the rotation now is even longer. But it's nice to have you back.
Thanks.
So we're talking 3D printing, and we were talking a little bit before the show, and I asked you, are you a 3D printing enthusiast? And you essentially said what I would say about some of my musical instruments. It's like, do you play the guitar? Well, I have a guitar.
Yes, I aspire to be a 3D printing enthusiast, but I'm not yet, I would say.
Yeah, so you were saying you made a few prints, but you ran into like technical issues with the printer where it was slow and it was fiddly to work with. And I think everyone that spent much time doing 3D printing feels that deeply in their soul.
Yeah. It's a budget question at some point. It's less and less now, but several years ago when I wanted to really get into it, it was very much a budget question. And the ones that were in my price range were a bit painful.
I understand. I've got I think technically mine is a Mono Select or Monoprice Maker Select 3 or something, which is a clone of a good 3D printer.
Okay, that's funny.
So someone described it as being my first 3D printer. It's like, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah, that's what mine was too, and it is now on a shelf because someday I'll get another one.
There is this fun thing that happens though, where it's like you can 3D print parts to put on your 3D printer to make it better. And
yes,
I did a little bit of that. And that sort of got me going into it got that first. It was that first serotonin cookie. I like that term, by the way.
I like that too.
I got that from Eben Upton when we interviewed him. But that first serotonin cookie from 3D printing was making a part to make the 3D printer better, to make better parts. And it gets you on that same ride that you get with software when you're making your software tools better to be able to make software better. So our guest today is all about that, all about, well, in this case, software to make 3D printing better. Let's go ahead and bring her on. It is Gina. Oh, I asked how to pronounce this, and
It's Häußge. I got it.
Häußge. Thank you.
Perfect.
You're welcome.
But welcome, Gina. It is wonderful to have you here.
I'm also an aspiring German speaker. Sorry.
You pretty much nailed the name already. Like that's half the job already done. Awesome.
Half the battle. So Gina,
yeah, it's great to be on here.
Yeah, for our listeners, we know, but for our listeners, what do you bring? What has been your stellar, and it is stellar and it is shining, contribution to 3D printing?
Yeah, I built this funny little tool called OctoPrint, which is basically, you could call it a baby monitor for your 3D printer. I created that basically just to scratch my own itch back around 12 years ago when I got my first printer. Back then, things were even worse than they are now with regards to reliability. And so I really did want to keep an eye on it doing its thing, but I did not necessarily want to have to do that in person. Mm-hmm. And so I looked for ways to solve that so that I could just put it into my spare bathroom and be able to watch it from afar. And ideally do this with something that I could just throw on a nifty little single board computer that had come out the very same year, the Raspberry Pi, back then in the first version, which still had no Wi-Fi and was only single core and really, really slow. So I had to make sure that stuff still worked on there. And I figured, well, someone will already probably have written something like this. And some solutions existed that allow to basically throw stuff at your printer and hope it sticks, so to speak. But there was nothing that also had this back channel that I wanted in order to be able to watch things, to make sure everything is okay, to get access to the temperature data from the 3D printer, to see progress updates, and ideally also hook up a webcam to everything to be able to really watch it from afar. Mm-hmm. And so over the course of my Christmas break that year, I sat down and wrote what is now known as OctoPrint. Obviously, only a very basic version of that at first. Mm-hmm. It did not have a plug-in system as it has now. It only worked with my printer and a very limited set of other printers, but it worked and it did what I needed it to do. And I threw it online and suddenly everyone said, oh, wow, I've been looking for something like this. And I started drowning in feature requests and then it took over my life and the rest is history.
It's a very Linus Torvalds sort of story, actually. This is this little thing I did for fun. It'll probably only ever work on my machine. And suddenly you throw it out there and everybody wants to use it and add to it.
Yeah, it definitely was not intentional what happened there. But it's fun.
But it's a good story.
It is. It's a great story.
Definitely. Like, even when people don't understand what open source software is or what 3D printers are, I always have something to tell at the party because then people go, what? You did what? And then what? And you still do that? And you give this away for free? And people still give you money for that regardless? What? Eh? So.
I am very curious about that part of it. I think we're going to cover some basics first, but I'm extremely curious to hear the story of how you make money with this open source thing. But before we go there, let's talk about what all you can do with OctoPrint. And then there's also OctoPi. So I guess first off, what is OctoPi? Is that officially part of the project?
Officially, that is still a third-party project. That is done by Guy Schäfer from I forgot the exact town he lives in, but he's from Israel, and we've been in contact since 2013, I think, when he came up with the first version of that. And it basically is a box standard Raspberry Pi image that has been extended to include OctoPrint, to include a webcam server, to include some other scripting around all of that, so that you can just, throw it into the Raspberry Pi configure, flash it to a disk and to an SD card, and put it into a Pi, and it will boot up immediately, connect to your Wi-Fi, and then you can just use OctoPrint from the next browser, completely headless. You don't need a keyboard, you don't need a mouse, you don't need a monitor or anything like that. All it wants is network and a printer, ideally, because without a printer, things will be a bit boring. I mean, technically, there is a virtual printer on board that I use for development, but you will not have a lot of fun with that if you're not a developer, I think. And so a lot of people confuse OctoPi and OctoPrint. OctoPrint is the thing that you actually interact with in your browser. That is the thing that actually talks to your printer. OctoPi is the image for the Raspberry Pi that ships with this and a bunch of other stuff so that you can get up and running really, really fast.
Sure. So OctoPrint is not necessarily limited to a Raspberry Pi, is it? You could throw it on anything that I'm assuming it's probably Linux only, but you could throw it on any machine?
No. It even works on Windows, it works on Mac, it works on... it's as long as you can run a regular Python, CPython probably. I'm not entirely sure about PyPy, but as long as you can run CPython on something, be it a Linux machine, a Windows machine, anything like that, it will work. You can use an old laptop, you can run it on the Steam Deck, you can run it on your NAS, you can run it on pretty much anything. It should have some RAM, it should have some CPU resources available for things, but there's also a Docker image, can
let's be honest though, if this started on the Raspberry Pi 1, it doesn't need a whole lot of RAM or CPU.
Well, back then it did not have plug-ins to think about, so things have increased a bit with regards to the resource consumption.
Yeah.
These days I actually recommend getting an RPi 3 at least, because four CPUs are nicer than one, and that makes a lot of things easier because you can suddenly now do things like printable G-code analysis in parallel without blocking the whole server with complicated calculations and such. But yeah.
Yeah, so that maybe is a good jumping off point to ask, what all can OctoPrint do now? It's more than just a babysitter, or at least my kid watching camera can't also change the diaper and also feed the kid. It feels like if we were to make that comparison, then OctoPrint could do at least those things.
Maybe. So I mean, what it could do right from the get-go was things like you have a basic file manager on there, so you can upload stuff, upload things from your slicer there, and most of the slicers actually now also either have an OctoPrint plugin available or come with OctoPrint support built in, so you can configure your OctoPrint instance in the slicer, and then when you slice a file, you can just say send to OctoPrint, maybe even send to OctoPrint and immediately start printing, and then all of that will work. This is thanks to the REST API that I have built in, which is also something that was in there right from the get-go, because I wanted to enable third-party clients to utilize OctoPrint to make your workflow a bit easier. You can connect to it from a box standard web browser, watch a webcam stream if you have a webcam connected. If not, that will become a bit tricky. Do all this file management stuff, connect to your printer, look at the communication terminal, control the printer, like move the head around, preheat it, things like this. And it also has some basic time-lapse functionality built in. So that is pretty much the standard package. It also comes with a bunch of bundled plugins now that will also take care of some safety checks. For example, if your firmware is known to have thermal runaway protection disabled, OctoPrint will warn you about that. If you upload a file that still has placeholders in there that were not properly replaced by your slicer, OctoPrint will warn you about that. If your Raspberry Pi is experiencing under voltage, OctoPrint will warn you about that, because we have seen that this can lead to browning out and interesting symptoms that are like really hard to understand if you've never seen it before. Suddenly your browser only loads half the files, or the print starts stuttering, but it still goes on. Like it's not gone, it's just halfway gone. And if you update the system in this case, things really, really break. The newest version will also get achievements.
Achievements? We've gamified it. That's cool.
The idea actually was not to gamify it per se, but that is something that we might talk about later when we come to the whole I'm working on this full time and am funded by the community thing. I wanted to make it more visible that this is the case, and I figured that having some achievements in there that are something that people maybe might enjoy, and set achievements also having the little info, by the way, I'm working on this full time, and if you want to support my work, you can do so here, would be a nice compromise between annoying neck screens and, gotta catch them all. So,
gotta catch them all. Oh, that's awesome. I would really like to hear that story, but I also had another question, and that's, we keep talking about the Raspberry Pi and OctoPi. Can I use OctoPrint if I don't have a Raspberry Pi? Yeah,
we yes, as I said, so that basically
you said that.
Yeah. If you have an old laptop, that is also an option. As I said, a Steam Deck is an option. I actually set up my full development environment on my Steam Deck as a test once, and that worked well.
And then
so yeah.
What am I missing though when I don't have the Raspberry Pi?
Basically, just the setup will be a bit more involved. It will not be a case of put your SD card in your reader, open the RPi Flash tool, select this image, enter your Wi-Fi credentials, and you are done. But instead, you will, in most likely, if you're installing it on some Linux distribution, I would, you would probably on OctoPrint's download page find the link to OctoPrint deploy, which is a script that is maintained by someone from the community, which does all the installation for you from the command line through a little wizard. So it asks you some questions, and then it does all of the package installing and hard work for you as well. So it's basically a thing of convenience. It, of course, also makes it very easy for me, it being the major platform, to test stuff, because I concentrate on everything needs to work on the Pi, and then the likelihood is very high that it also works elsewhere, because
Okay,
that is
so-
definitely a more limited platform than your run-of-the-mill Core i7 laptop with whatnot.
So you might say Raspberry Pi is recommended, assuming you can get your hands on one these days.
I would say it is, if you just want to get up and running really fast, it would be what I recommend, yeah.
So, Catherine, the main advantage of the Raspberry Pi is that it's tiny and you can
of
strap
course,
it
sure.
right to your 3D printer. Good luck
That's
strapping
also,
your
yeah.
old laptop to the side of your 3D printer. I mean, you could probably make it work.
Depends on the printer, right?
You could probably 3D print some brackets to make that happen. But the Raspberry Pi, you can just zip tie it on there and be done.
There's also a ton
other-
of cheap thin clients that you can buy these days on
Nux
eBay
or-
and such.
Yeah,
Yeah, or
that's-
Nux, and
Yeah.
like a ton of options.
So I'm talking about the capabilities. Last question I want to get in right now on that. I've seen that apparently it's possible to slice right in OctoPrint.
Yeah, that was something that, like, I've actually thought about throwing that out again, but for now I'll keep it in. So the thing is, back in, I actually have to speak a bit about the stuff that we wanted to get later about the
Okay,
whole
that's
funding
fine.
thing. So I started working full time on OctoPrint when a Spanish tech company that also sold 3D printers basically hired me full time to work on OctoPrint. Like, no strings attached, just do your thing and continue to do your thing, make our awesome stuff, and maybe help us a bit with our projects in that regard. And then there's that. And they back then really wanted to be able to slice in the web interface as well. And so that is something that back then I looked into and also made work in a way by basically remote controlling a Cura engine binary that I also put on there. And all of this worked nicely. You could upload a slicing profile, and then as long as your G-code, not your G-code, as long as your STL files were from the rotation were okay-ish, it would work. The problem is that I started, basically a cat and mouse game, because the slicer engine evolved faster than I could keep up with keeping things in sync, and the whole experience of using a slicer from the browser was also a bit meh, because it would always not be able to compete with the desktop version, right? I made it part of the whole plugin system to enable people from the community to work on that instead and look into it. And last I checked, I think 4 or 5 weeks ago or so, I saw someone had taken up work again on the full-featured slicer plugin that actually gives you a 3D view in your browser in an OctoPrint tab, allows you to rotate things and configure settings for the slicer and all of that, and work through this. But yeah, for me, I have to say it simply never was the right amount of work versus payout.
I can see why in some cases it's a nifty feature to have.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, if nothing else, that it would then enable like a workflow where you could download an STL on a mobile device and then kick that over to your printer and not have to have a slicer, because as far as I know, there's no slicers for mobile. But on the other hand, there's some magic that happens in slicing.
Yeah, and it's gotten only more complicated over the
Yes.
past. Don't let me lie. I think that was 10 years ago when I started looking into this stuff, and there has happened a lot
Yes,
since
a
then
lot
in
of it-
slicer technology.
A lot of advancements, a lot of tricks people have come up with.
Yeah, so
All right.
keeping up with that would have been a project on its own.
Yes.
I
So
already had one.
Yeah, you already had one. Well, let's talk about that. And so to move kind of into this, the bigger story about making money with it, what first comes to mind is where were you at that you had the 3D printer and it was I wish there was this piece of software, and you then came from a place where you said, I bet I could do that. And I'm just curious, like what the background was that led you to that conclusion, because most people would go, man, I wish there's a piece of software that would do this. I wish somebody would write this, maybe put it out on Twitter or Facebook, and then forget about it.
Yeah, so back then I happened to still be in my, as I call it now, my corporate life. I was a consultant. I was doing custom solution development for really big customers with a consulting company. And my day job basically consisted of coding Java in some enterprise environments for telecommunication companies and similar stuff here in Germany.
Thank you, by the way, for not writing OctoPrint in Java.
No problem. And
No comment.
and I was actually having a good career there. I had good chances to really move fast and high. The problem was that, the more I moved, the more people, or rather my boss told me I'm getting too expensive to code. I need to produce more hot air than code, basically. And the thing is that I fell in love with coding ever since I touched a computer for the first time at age 7. Like back then, my uncle gave us a very, very old, already then very, very old Apple IIe. And I was like, yeah, computer, I want to play. And my father was, no, this is a tool. I can show you how to use it. And then he taught me some basic commands. And I was hooked because this was like playing with Lego, but without the bricks running out. And so this was a defining moment for me, because then a couple of years later, I learned that this was actually a profession. Like at age 11 or so, and that was when I knew what I wanted to be in my life. I wanted to be someone who writes code for a living. And so, yeah, the whole school life was directed for that. And I also, of course, studied computer science and then went into the industry. And then it suddenly happened that people were telling me, yeah, well, you are too good a coder. We will move you away from code. And I was like, no, why? And that was when I started to really itch for personal projects. Mm-hmm. So I bought myself a 3D printer in late 2012 and had this problem that I described, and just figured, hey, I got a vacation coming up and I haven't coded something fun in a while. I could just do that. And I could also use another language that I haven't used so much, like Java. And I had taught myself Python a couple of years prior and decided, yeah, well, that could work maybe. The other option was Node.js, but getting a serial connection to work under Node.js under Windows back then was an absolute nightmare, so I decided against that. And yeah, so I
How
just
long
happened
was
to
that
be
vacation?
a nerd.
Sorry.
2 weeks.
Okay.
2 weeks from basically from start to finish, mostly spent coding on OctoPrint. And after that, it was a minimal viable product. So that was fun.
Yeah, that was going to be my guess. Somebody that already sort of knows what they're doing about 2 weeks. Most of your fun projects get done in about that amount of time. To get to that first working. Because if it takes much longer than that, most of us are just like, that was fun to work on that, but I'll go do something else now.
I should add, I had absolutely no idea how this whole printer communication worked. So what I did was going with Python anyhow. Cura was written in Python. Cura had a communication stack to talk with the printer and stream stuff to it. So I just took that from Cura and used it and hooked into it. Originally, OctoPrint was actually a plugin for Cura that would just offer the functionality of Cura for controlling your 3D printer on a web interface. Then people complained, why does it have this Cura dependency? We don't need that. And that was when I refactored things. But yeah, so it's all a bit weird how this happened.
Yeah. So Cura, of course, is an Ultimaker product, which good on them for making it open source. Have you had continual communications with like Ultimaker? Have they ever offered to step in and sponsor your work?
No. I mean, I think one of the founders of Ultimaker at some point at least supported me on Patreon, but other than that, there was nothing official. I think back then, Cura also was not yet a full Ultimaker thing. So the thing is that the creator of Cura worked at Ultimaker, but I think that was something he started in his free time, actually. We met at a conference ages ago, once. And we talked a bit about that. But then, yeah, basically, I'm not even sure if he's still with that company or not. But I'm really glad that Ultimaker decided to keep Cura open source and FLOSS and all, because everything else would have been a bit sad, really. It's a good slicer.
Well, I think we talked earlier about how that slicing has come along as much as it has. I think if Cura had not been open source, we would not be able to say that to quite the same extent. The fact that everybody can get in there and add features and try things is one of the big reasons why we have so much magic in slicing.
Absolutely.
So go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, so I was actually, I'm really curious because, we've been talking about how the beginnings of the project, and you've talked about, you've recruited some other developers for plugins and other things. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about how your development workflow has evolved over these many years, right? The way that people make software has changed quite a bit. And I know I understand there's something that you're kind of really excited to talk about there, but I wondered if you could talk about your tooling and your setup. And I would really like to hear about that, but I kind of would be curious to know what got you there too.
Yeah, so, in the beginning, it was just a side project that I did in the evenings and on the weekends, and that is also how I approach distributing it. Like, I just threw new stuff on GitHub, and people updated from GitHub. There were no versions, there was no release log, there was nothing like that, and that of course had to change once things got a bit more serious. I started creating actual releases. I started writing change logs, which I, by the way, still do. And usually on every release takes me at least a day, because I really do put everything that changed in there, even though I know rarely anyone reads them. But I know that is complete. And then for a while I just had versioning and such. Then at some point I started running into these issues where we release something new on a Thursday or a Friday, and then you spend the whole weekend fixing it. So I started to create frozen zones for myself. I do not release anymore anything after a Wednesday. That is a big rule for me. And also not after December the 10th. Because reasons. Then I found myself a couple of times in the situation that still things broke, and really tremendously. And even though they now broke on a Wednesday instead of a Friday, that still sucked. So I introduced release candidates, and that has also been really, really helpful, because it turns out no matter how much I try to test, I have a limited set of 3D printers here. I have a limited set of plug-in versus version combinations. I cannot test everything under the sun. And people out there are amazingly creative in breaking things. So if I now give them a release candidate for 4 weeks to play with, I can be sure they find a lot of stuff that I would never have thought about trying out. And that way, hopefully dig out all the bugs that made it into the release before they hit everyone out there who might not be as comfortable with basically rolling back manually or helping themselves out of a hole if push comes to shove, if I cannot fix stuff as fast as I would like to. And that has been, I guess, the secret behind having very, very stable and bug-free releases in the past years. This whole change from, I just push it out, to, 4 weeks of release candidates. Oops, a bug. Okay, 4 weeks of another release candidate. Oops, a bug. That, of course, means slow releases, but also less breakage.
Makes sense.
There's somebody pointed me at a website a few days ago. Should I deploy .today? And the answer is almost always no. If it's like a Thursday or Friday, no. If it's afternoon, no. So right now, if I pull it up, should I deploy? It's the idea of a magic 8 ball, I think. And right now, if I pull it up, trust me, they will be much happier if it wasn't broken for a night.
I have to admit that I also depend a bit on my gut feeling. Like when I have something brewing and I could push it out now, but my gut for some reason says, wait until tomorrow. I listen to it. I cannot really say if it has prevented a lot of damage, but I just feel better and less stressed, and that really does wonders for my work-life balance as well. So that is just worth it. And I've actually had a bunch of times where overnight someone reported a big glaring bug that I then quickly still could fix.
Yes.
So that was nice.
This seems like a really great, you just said a phrase that I'm curious about, work-life balance. So as a maintainer of a project like this, do you ever just get really burned out?
Yeah.
I feel like, so burnout has been kind of a topic that I'm interested in lately, without going off on a tangent. Burnout can have ramifications, right? If you can't sustain a project because you're too burned out, or it can have security implications, for example.
As we just saw, yeah.
Yes.
Right, and I wondered what you could tell us about how you handle that. Like, how do you? I mean, I understand you have either your release cadence and you don't deploy on Fridays or anything like that. But what else do you kind of have in place to maintain the balance so that you don't get so burned out? What happens when you do get burned out? How do you back off and kind of recenter?
I should say that I pretty much feel like I'm constantly circling the drain a bit. Less so these days than, let's say, 3 years ago or 4 years ago when it was really, really bad. So yeah, how much time do we have? Because I can talk ages about that.
Completely change the conversation.
But so one very strict rule for myself is that my free time is my free time. I don't care if things explode during this time. Like, there are a bunch of trusted friends also in the OctoPrint space who, when I am on vacation, do have my number like my actual phone number in case something really, really, really horrible happens and I need to do something. But I trust them that they will never call me unless something is almost literally on fire. And the rest of the time, really, my weekends are my weekends, my after hours are my after hours. I have split mailboxes. This is also very, very important. Like, my personal email doesn't touch on OctoPrint stuff. Yeah. I even have a mail forwarding rule that if just the word OctoPrint shows up in an email, it would immediately just go to the other one and stay out of my inbox, because otherwise I constantly get dragged back into work. I have a post pinned on my Mastodon profile that says, "Hi, this is my private account. I love to be able to use it after hours and during the weekends and on my vacation. So if you have anything OctoPrint related to say, please do so here to the OctoPrint account. Thank you." And I also used to have the same thing on Twitter when I was still on there.
Smart.
Yeah, because otherwise people will just drag you back into work. I actually had someone call my landline at once. Like, in Germany, you still have this legal situation that if you have a website that could be considered commercial, so even if you're just putting ads on there, it is considered commercial. You have to have a legal notice that also includes a way to contact you by phone. So I had a phone number on there, a phone number that directly went to a mailbox, but a phone number. And one day I got a message from this phone number provider. "Hey, there's a new message on your mailbox." And I listened to that message. I was like, "Yeah, I had this problem with OctoPrint, and could you please?" And that was like, I don't know, at 1 a.m. in the morning. And no. Oh. Just no. Setting these boundaries and also enforcing them when half the internet is trying to get your attention is very, very important, because they will try to drag you back into work. They will try to get their very personal problem solved right now. And I have learned that just being very clear when I'm not available helps a lot in setting boundaries. And in fact, people will then tell you, sorry, and enjoy your vacation and such. But it's really important to not let yourself get sweet talked into giving up on your free time all the time.
Yeah, I think most people understand, they just don't think about it. Like, a developer to an open source project, it's almost like people don't realize that that's a real person behind that
exactly.
I think you're right.
I mean, I also have the problem that I think most people don't know that it is pretty much me. Like, there is no team there. There are a bunch of there's no OctoPrint Corporation. There is no no, I'm not the head of an invisible team of 13 to 15 worker bees that are working on it in the background. No, if you look into the commit log of OctoPrint, you will see my name a lot in there, which is why I'm still writing most of the code myself. Of course, there are also external contributions, but if you look at like the constant maintenance stuff, that is still on me. And I just need a break from everything sometimes.
So do you have the desire, or do you have a plan to recruit more, I wouldn't say successors, obviously, because I hope you'll be working on this a long time, but people to kind of carry some of the load?
Yeah, I've been looking into, that is actually something that is really tricky to do when you are already at 100% workload, but I've been trying to work on better documentation, basically to do what I would say is pretty much a brain dump. So... Because the problem with a lot of things that I get as feature requests and such is there is a lot of I've learned a lot about how different printer firmwares work, what are the things to look out for, all these differences that can really cause you to shoot yourself into the foot if you do a certain change somewhere. And that is something that not very many people do have, I would say, on this whole planet, let alone people who are free and able and willing to work on, to help work on OctoPrint. So that is always stuff that needs to be communicated then in some way. And of course, the same goes for OctoPrint's whole architecture and all the bits and pieces and such. So if I really want more core contributors, I think I need to enable them to teach themselves better. And for that, I need better documentation, and for that, I need time that I don't have because, it's a bit of a cycle, but I'm working through it. I'm always just working out sometime here and sometime there, and then making this and that. And so it's a process. It's an involved and slow process, but it's a process. And I have to say that the plugin system already did a whole ton because, and I put this in 2014 with version 1.2.0. 2015, sorry. Yeah. Because that enabled people to, instead of waiting for me to implement something that they wanted, to just implement themselves. And implement themselves without having to learn pretty much everything else, but just concentrate on the stuff that they want to do, on the interfaces that they need and all of that, and do really, really nifty stuff that. And some of the most active plugin developers are now also helping with all of the issues and regular pushes of code and such. So that is really, really nice.
Talking about adding core members and co-maintainers. Obviously, it's been so recent we can't say that without
everything is nervous.
I know.
Yes, without thinking about XZ and SSH. One of the things that I suggested that maybe projects need to do going forwards is follow the Debian model, and that it essentially meaning do not bring someone onto your core team without having actually met them in person. And I don't know if
that could get tricky, though, if you do not have a big, huge fund of travel money that you can just use for that.
It's true. That is, and I think it's sort of onerous over on the Debian side too, because that's their policy on Debian. You do not get to be a Debian packager unless someone from the Debian packaging team has met you in person, and then the way they handle that is they sign each other's GPG keys. But it would make it a lot harder to pull off an op like what XZ did, what happened with XZ. So I don't know, but as you say, it's a lot of expense for a small project.
Yeah.
I think we will be talking a long time yet to come about how to prevent something from that, like that from happening again. And frankly, for me, when I read about this over the Easter weekend, all the time I just thought this could have been me. Like, obviously, if someone did the same to OctoPrint, it would not have the implications here. But still, I have had some security issues. And every single time I feel sweat on my head, and I feel this cold run down my spine.
Yes. We've all been there.
Get somewhat nauseous, and so it is an experience, something like this. But My personal thing that I'm taking from the whole XC thing is really that if someone starts pushing me that I should accept a change, then I'll just consider it a security issue. And like, I think public pushback will get handled a bit more aggressively in the future from every maintainer under the sun now, thanks to that.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that I've kind of thought about with this, we're going a little bit off track, but that's fine. There's been a bit of a push, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is my thinking on it. There's been a bit of a push that open source projects need to be nicer to people coming in from the outside. And one of the things we've seen from XZ is no, open source projects need to be able to tell people to go away.
Yeah.
And it almost seems to me that maybe we've backed ourselves into this corner by insisting that we're nice when maybe that's not always the answer. And giving maintainers back that permission to be a little rude, to channel their inner Linus, is maybe an important thing.
I think both things can be true, right?
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
go
think we
ahead.
need to find some way to have less entitlement on the one side and less rudeness on the other, and just get back a bit more to collaboration in general. Because
Yeah.
my experience as a maintainer has been a lot of getting screamed at from people when something doesn't work, and getting demands that I should fix it right away, getting told to kill myself over really, like, I actually have had gotten that. And like, things like this, when you're giving away something for free versus, I mean, I cannot say that I do not get thanks enough, but because I do actually get people telling me that I have improved their life, that I'm a role model for their kids, which always makes me like, whoa, what? I never set out to be that, but okay, thanks. And things like this, and this always makes my day, but it really only takes one or two of these beep holes to ruin your whole week.
Yes.
And this is also what contributes, and this is how we get back to burnout. This is really something that contributes to maintainer burnout, because you constantly work and you constantly work your ass off, and you are like, I would actually say that a lot of my blood, sweat, and tears is in OctoPrint, and then people come in and basically just scream at me, often for an issue with their printer that is not even in my control. And
Boy.
that is just not working out well. And then someone comes in and is really, really nice and wants to help you, and you just need to give them commit access. I mean, that sounds kind of sweet in that moment, right?
Yep.
I can totally understand how that happened.
Oh, no, absolutely.
I am very, very careful about who gets write access, and I always have been. And if truth be told, if it ever comes to the point where we'll stop working on OctoPrint, I will not give over maintenance to someone else, but just archive things and say, hey, if you want to continue this to continue, then fork and rename it and do it that way. But I can totally see why people are just desperate sometimes and take every help they can get.
Flashing through my mind just then were potential names for the fork, and it's like, you could name it Nanoprint for 9 instead of 8. So
That also gives you chances for future forks.
There you go. Okay, I'm curious, talking about this issue of burnout and then connecting it to the other thing we want to talk about. Does being able to do it as a day job, does getting paid for it help, or does it make the burnout problem worse? Or does it not matter?
I wouldn't say, I think it doesn't matter, because the thing is, money allows me to have a roof over my head, to eat, to sometimes also buy myself nice things or go on vacations. And most of it actually goes towards a retirement fund, because I am not getting younger. So at some point I will not able to do that anymore, probably. So I have to plan ahead for that as well. What it does not do is give me more time. It does not allow me to sleep less. It does not allow me to rest less in general. My day still has 24 hours, and I still need at least 8 hours of sleep per night, because otherwise, ugh.
Yes.
I would say with regards to the burnout situation, no, it really doesn't change things. And with regards to the burnout attributing entitlement and toxicity problem with some parts of the user base, it also doesn't help at all. But of course, it is really nice to be able to really fully concentrate on one thing, on one project, instead of trying to squeeze this into your life as a pet project, which is what I did the first 1.5 years of this journey. And that was actually something that affected both my mental and physical health, and is something that I would not recommend doing again. Like, that was Java during the day and Python at night, and nah.
Just say no.
Yes. So
At a certain project size, you really need some way to, either you need way more people that work on it, or ideally you need to find someone who is able to do it full time, ideally you, if you are the creator, because otherwise it just doesn't scale. We expect, I mean, the whole idea about open source from many people is not that the source is being shared, but hey, I don't have to pay anything. But all of this stuff does not happen in a vacuum, and people should be aware that it has a cost attached. And usually this cost is currently paid by maintainers in shape of their health. And maybe that should not be that way, and maybe we should rethink this as a society. But now I'm sounding like Star Trek again, so yeah.
Oh, we could dive into the philosophy and economics of that, which would be very interesting. I don't think we have time to, though. But
Yeah,
I
that's
do.
my problem.
I do want to ask, and maybe we'll take a show sometime in the future and just talk about that. But so I want to ask. You said you worked on it basically as a hobby for 1.5 years, and then were able to go full time with it. How did you make that transition? What changed? How did you find someone that was willing to pay, your salary at a living wage to be able to do that?
They found me. Like, this was an absolute accident. For some reason, precisely at the right time, because it happened when I found myself in this situation where I already had reduced my day job to 80%, so that I had 1 day per week dedicated to OctoPrint. And that proved to simply not be enough anymore either. So the weekends it was again, and sometimes I didn't do anything for a month or more because I was just too burnt out, because the day job was also very, very intense and lots of responsibility and design decisions and whatnot. And so, yeah, and right when I was sitting there, actually with some horrible back problems, which, looking back, probably were caused by stress. I got an email in my inbox going like, "Hi, I'm from company such and such, and we were wondering if we could invite you to Madrid to just get to know you and talk with you about OctoPrint, because we would like to just hire you to work on it." And I was like, "Okay, I've never been to Spain. Why not?" And then I flew over for a weekend basically, and we talked, and in the end we also talked about money, obviously, and we agreed on something that worked out for both of us, which was not a step back, thankfully for me, but also not like I was not ripping out trees with that either. It was just okay. And what was very important back to me was that I had full control over OctoPrint, that everything would work out in that regard, that I was making the decisions, that they would not go, but we do not want that feature, we want this feature, or something like that, that it would still be something that focused on the community, the global community, and not just on whatever their printers needed. And all of that was something I got in writing, and so that was fine. Back then, they also said I would get a whole team of people. I never got a whole team of people. But okay. And so that is how I worked basically from summer of 2014 to early 2016. And then they ran out of money. And so I found myself with a full-time open source project that really would not be something that I could still do as a side project, because I already knew what it would cause me in terms of health problems. And I figured, okay, either I now go back into my old corporate role, which I mean, I could have done easily. Lots of options here. I was not worried about that, but it was also not something that I just wanted to do and give up on OctoPrint, because OctoPrint felt like something that I was actually helping people with, that I was actually making an impact in an industry with. And so I figured, okay, I will at least try to make this work with crowdfunding. I'm a complete risk-averse person. Going self-employed was something completely against my nature, but I figured if I do not try this, I will kick myself in the butt for the rest of my life and asking myself, what if? So I did it. And roughly, actually, now 6 years to the day almost, my Patreon campaign launched. Where I also explained the situation and told people I want to keep this open source, I want to keep doing this, I need to do this full time, because I simply cannot do this after hours as a side job anymore. It is not a side job, it is a full-time job. So it should be able to pay the bills. Help me, please. And to my utmost surprise, people did just that and have been doing just that since then. So OctoPrint is 100% crowdfunded. There is also some money coming in through ads on the forums and the website. Not in OctoPrint, though. OctoPrint is completely ad-free. And also, I also have some shirts up and such that people can buy, from which I get some commission. But overall, it really is just... it really is just all the people who use OctoPrint who are keeping OctoPrint funded. And that is pretty damn amazing.
It is. That is really impressive.
Yeah.
Okay. We are already getting towards out of time. Catherine, I'll kick it back over to you. I know it's gone really fast. I'll kick it back over to Catherine if she has any final questions she wants to ask. And then I will get into my final questions and we can wrap.
I don't think I do. Although I think I'm not sure we ever got to the tooling thing. I know you're excited about some tooling that you wanted to talk to and automation, and I don't think we got to that. But I don't know. I'll let Jonathan tell us if we have time.
We can
for you
cover
to
that real
share
quick.
your.
It'll be fine.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I would love to hear about how you're making your life easier with some automation.
Yeah, okay, so I will try to give you basically the really quick version of that. So the thing is that, remember when I said that I go through all these release candidates and the releases, and of course everything needs to be tested as much as possible. So every single release that I push out needs to be tested against a multitude of starting points in software versioning. So bunch of software versions, bunch of Python versions, and basically what I do here is a bunch of OctoPy versions, because I still have people running images from 3 years ago out there versus some even older. I actually saw some that are really ancient by now in the anonymous usage tracking pop-up recently, but yeah. And a long time I did all of this manually. Like I took an SD card, put it in my reader, flashed it, then manually edited some files on there so it would have the right starting point, then pushed it into the Raspberry Pi, booted that up manually, waited until it was there, yada, yada, yada. It took a lot of time. So on every single release, I had to go through something like 5 to 10 scenarios like that. And doing all of these steps manually with one card reader meant literally hours that were spent doing nothing but flashing cards, manually going through update steps, often getting confused, having to start again, so it was absolutely horrible. And I searched for a solution for that for years. When I finally came across a nifty little device called an USB SD Max from a German company here, called, I think, Linux Automation, GmbH or something. And that is a really nifty thing because it slots into the micro SD card slot, into any micro SD card slot, gets powered through USB, and can then also act as both a mass storage device through the USB plug that you, for example, put into another Raspberry Pi, or as the SD card for the Raspberry Pi as the boot medium. And you can toggle the two between through the USB connection. So I now have 3 Raspberry Pi 3s, 3 of these USB SD Maxes, a USB hub that I can control each individual USB port on, the power on, which I also modded a bit so it actually can serve the power for 3 Raspberry Pi 3s, and 1 Raspberry Pi 4 that all of this is attached to and that acts as the flash host. And then I wrote a whole bunch of scripts and laser cut myself a nice little frame in which everything is mounted. And now what I can do is I fire off a little script. It will take care of putting the Pi offline, mounting the SD card, flashing the SD card, provisioning the SD card, going to my start version, and then boot everything up, wait until it is booted, wait until it is responding, fire up the website in my browser so it might pop, and there is OctoPrint, and I just have clicked the button and then everything works. I make a green check box and off the next command goes. And I even can now do all of that through a Tailscale tunnel through GitHub Actions. So when a new image gets built, it automatically fires off all of this chain in my own network, runs a bunch of end-to-end tests, fully automated, and then just sends me an email if this fails. So that thing saves me hours on every single release, candidate, and I sing its praise every time. Like, really, I remember how horrible it was before, and now being just able to let myself generate a bunch of commands. I also wrote a script that generates myself a bunch of commands that I then go through. Like, everything gets automated. Everything that is repetitive gets automated.
Awesome.
So just being able to do that is
I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah, it was precisely that feeling.
Sorry, I had a little A-team. I'm giving away my age again.
I understood it. I'm giving away mine as well, right?
Fun. All right. So I did promise I would ask Ken McDonald's question, and it made sense when he asked it. Can most feature requests be added via the plugins?
I would say the majority can. Yeah, there are some things that require some core adjustments, but these days my approach usually is, if it is not something that really only makes sense to have in core, to have for everything, for everyone, then I rather build in a way to edit through a plugin. I might write the plugin myself. I might make the plugin bundled, which means it automatically gets installed with OctoPrint or even is included in OctoPrint. Things like the software update mechanism, the plugin manager itself, the achievements, the checks that I mentioned before, the safety checks for the firmware, the sanity checks for the G-code files. All of these are plugins. They are bundled plugins, but they are plugins. Yep. My approach really is, like, if I can write it in a plugin, I put it in a plugin. And if I cannot write it in a plugin, then I look if it might not make sense to allow implementing it as a plugin, because that will also enable others to do fun new stuff with this.
Yeah, very cool. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you wanted to make sure to let folks know about?
I don't think so. I think we went over a ton.
We did. We covered a lot of ground. Okay, so a fun final question that I like to ask folks is, what is the thing, where have you found OctoPrint? What has someone done with it that has surprised you the most? What has been the most interesting use that someone has had for it?
Someone actually used it to power their home-built pick-and-place machine.
Oh, fascinating.
I did not expect that angle at all.
That's really cool, though. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I wonder if we've covered that on Hackaday. If not, that sounds like a thing that we should.
It might be. And another thing, I pretty much every year or sometimes a couple of months, I just get surprised how people use the plugin interfaces that I built. Mm-hmm. Like, people have done things from plugins where I looked at the plugin and had to go through the source code because I wanted to understand how they did that with what I gave them to. And there were so creative solutions, and sometimes they were a bit hacky, but sometimes they were also quite beautiful and like made me go, oh, wonderful, amazing. And those are really great moments when you look at how people use what you build to build even more awesome stuff, and you're just in awe at how they pulled that off.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so final two questions then is, what is your favorite scripting language and text editor?
Python obviously is a scripting language, so
Okay.
it would count, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I also do a lot in Bash, to be honest. And these days I primarily use Visual Studio Code. But if we are talking command line, then it's VI.
All right, I
okay.
think both are valid answers. Okay, thank you, Gina, so much for being here. It was a lot of fun. You're primarily Patreon employed these days, so go ahead and plug. What's your Patreon URL?
Yeah, patreon.com/Fusel. But if you do not like Patreon, you can also just go to support.octoprint.org, and there are a bunch of options. There's also GitHub sponsors, donor books, Ko-fi. I'm trying to give you all the options to throw money in my way.
Make it as easy as possible. Yeah, makes sense. All right, it has been a blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Miss Katherine, what do you think? Have we talked you into pulling your 3D printer back out?
I don't know. I think you've talked me into maybe getting a new one. I do have some friends who are users of OctoPrint, incidentally. I did not mention. So I feel like I might be asking for some advice on maybe a new printer. I keep saying this, and then I go on and treat myself to something totally unrelated. So we'll see.
I felt personally called out when she talked about people running OctoPrint on ancient installs of Octopi, and I'm like, mine's right over there, and it's not been updated for a very long time. But it does what I needed to do, and it's kind of on the back of my to-do list. It's like, you should really pull that Pi down and just rebuild it all together, and maybe put something a little faster up there. So I don't even know if that's a Pi 3. It may be like a 1 or 2. Yeah, it's over there, not turned on at the moment, because boy, everything is noisy when it's over there doing something. So, but one of these days we'll get it done between all the other projects.
I love it.
Yeah, fun times. All right, Kathy, you want to plug anything?
Oh, sure. This goes out pretty soon, so if anybody's going to be at the Open Source Summit, I'm giving a few talks. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm sure I've posted something about them. But I'm talking about security, which is the cool kid on the block again because of recent events, I think.
Yes.
So yeah, open source software and security is always an important conversation. Oh, and I have a podcast, Open at Intel. I also have another that podcast, and Reality 2.0, another podcast. So if you're a podcast listener, you can hear my voice in many, many places.
Yeah. Let's see, the conference you're going to speak at, where and when is that?
That's the Open Source Summit, and also SOS Community Day, which is a co-located event the day before. So that's all in Seattle, and that's coming up next week. So SOS Community Day is an event by the OpenSSF, the Open Source the Open Source Security Foundation. Sorry. And it's going to be a good time. A whole bunch of cool open source people getting together to solve the world's problems.
Cool. I love it.
Hopefully.
I'm sure they will be talking about the XZ problem and the
I'm sure. No pressure giving a security presentation.
Fun. All right. Well, next week we've got Andy Stewart scheduled, which if you're in the ham world, if you're in that intersection between Linux and ham, then that's probably a name you know. If you are not, he is obviously a ham that does stuff with Linux, and I believe he's actually got his own Linux distro that is specifically aimed at doing fun things with ham radio. We're going to talk to him, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then the only other things that I've got to plug are catch my work at hackaday.com. We have this security column. I'm in this world too. That goes live every Friday morning. We have a lot of fun with that. And then we've still got the Untitled Linux Show over at twit.tv/ULS. And that is now available to the public. The audio version of it is. And then there's Club Twit if you want to really get in there and be part of the live show and part of the Discord. Have a lot of fun with that. I want to say thank you to everyone. We had some folks listening live, had some live questions. And thank you to everyone on the download. We sure appreciate it from all of you. And we'll see you next time on Floss Weekly.